I was loading my belongings into cardboard boxes when my mother stood in my doorway with that look I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Brady's girlfriend is 8 months pregnant, and they need your room," she announced. "The garage has been cleaned out for you." 23 years of being the invisible daughter in this house, and now they were literally putting me in storage. What they didn't know was that I'd already accepted a job offer 3 states away. Tonight, I would simply disappear. Growing up as the middle child between my older brother Brady and younger sister Mackenzie meant I'd mastered the art of being overlooked. Brady was the golden boy who'd gotten a football scholarship before dropping out to pursue his music career. My parents never questioned his decision, even when he moved back home at 25 with nothing to show for his dreams, except a few demo CDs and a mountain of credit card debt. They converted the basement into a recording studio, spending money they didn't have on professional equipment that mostly gathered dust, while Brady slept until noon. Mackenzie was the baby who could do no wrong, currently finishing her senior year at an expensive private university. My parents had mortgaged the house to afford. Every phone call home was met with enthusiasm about her sorority events, her study abroad plans, her internship opportunities. They drove 5 hours each way to attend her sophomore year theater production, where she played background character number 3. The refrigerator was covered in photos of her achievements, from kindergarten finger paintings to college acceptance letters. I'd worked 2 jobs to put myself through community college, earning my accounting degree, while living at home to save money. Morning shifts at a bakery meant I was up at 4:30 kneading dough and preparing pastries before heading to afternoon classes. Evenings were spent at a call center processing insurance claims until my eyes burned from staring at the computer screen. Weekends belonged to studying, squeezing in homework between double shifts. My parents never attended my graduation. They were at Brady's band's gig that night, a dive bar performance for 12 people that they called an important networking opportunity. The reality of my position in the family hierarchy had been clear for years, but I'd convinced myself things would change once I proved my worth. My degree would make them proud. My job at the accounting firm would show them I was responsible. Contributing to household expenses would earn their respect. Instead, my achievements became expectations, my contributions taken for granted like breathing or heartbeats. The twist came when I discovered my childhood bedroom had been slowly transformed over the years without my noticing. One afternoon, searching for my old graphing calculator to help a coworker's daughter with homework, I realized my awards had been removed from the walls. Empty nail holes marked where my academic achievement certificates once hung. My photos had been relegated to boxes in the closet family portraits, replaced with ones where I was conveniently absent or pushed to the edges, barely visible. The revelation hit when I found my high school valedictorian certificate being used as scratch paper in the kitchen drawer. Shopping lists scrawled across my name, phone numbers jotted in the margins of my perfect GPA. My mother had been using it to track grocery expenses, the gold seal partially torn where she'd ripped off a corner to leave a note for the plumber. 23 years of trying to matter in this house, and my greatest achievement had become scrap paper beneath expired coupons and takeout menus. 3 weeks before the garage incident, Brady had stumbled through the front door at 2 a.m. with his girlfriend Sienna. The sound of their arrival woke the entire house, her sobs echoing through the hallway, while Brady fumbled with light switches and knocked over the umbrella stand. I peered out of my bedroom door to see my parents rushing from their room, bathrobes, hastily tied faces, creased with concern that immediately transformed into action mode at the sight of Sienna's tears. She was crying, holding her swollen belly mascara streaming down her cheeks in dark rivers. Her designer maternity dress was wrinkled blonde hair tangled like she'd been sleeping in a car. Brady stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, wearing that same helpless expression he'd perfected since childhood whenever he needed our parents to fix his problems. Her parents kicked her out. Brady explained, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. They found out about the baby and just threw her out. Can you believe that their own daughter... Without hesitation, my mother wrapped Sienna in a hug, cooing sympathetic words while guiding her toward the living room. My father immediately offered their guest room, launching into reassurances about family sticking together, about doing the right thing. Nobody noticed me watching from the shadows of the hallway, my presence as insignificant as the family photos where I'd been cropped out or turned into background blur. The guest room was prepared within the hour. My mother pulled out her best sheets, the ones reserved for holidays, while my father helped Brady carry in suitcases from his beat-up Honda Civic. Sienna's belongings seemed excessive for someone who'd supposedly been kicked out suddenly. Matching luggage sets, boxes of shoes, garment bags that required 2 trips. I offered to help but was waved away, told to go back to bed since I had work in the morning. But that wasn't enough for Brady. Over breakfast the next morning, he casually mentioned needing more space for the baby's things. Sienna sat beside him, one hand resting on her belly, the other picking at the scrambled eggs my mother had prepared specially for her. Organic, free-range, nothing but the best for the woman carrying their grandchild. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, while I ate my usual toast and prepared my lunch for work. The guest room is lovely. Sienna said, her voice sweet as artificial sweetener. But Brady's right. Once the baby comes, we'll need so much more room. The crib, the changing table, all those baby clothes and toys. Plus, I'll need space for my meditation and prenatal yoga. It's crucial for the baby's development. My father suggested converting the basement, but Brady shook his head immediately. Too damp, he said with authority, as if he hadn't been living down there rent-free for 3 years. And the stairs would be dangerous for Sienna once the baby comes. All that up and down with a newborn. The shocking twist came when I walked into the kitchen after my shower to find them already measuring my room, discussing paint colors for the nursery, while I stood there invisible, my coffee mug trembling in my hands. My mother held paint swatches against my walls, debating between gentle rain and sweet dreams, while Sienna pointed out where the crib would go, right where my desk currently sat. This window gets perfect morning light, Sienna observed, running her manicured fingers along the windowsill where my small collection of succulents lived. Babies need natural light for proper circadian rhythm development. I read about it in my parenting blog. Brady nodded enthusiastically, already moving my belongings with his eyes rearranging my life to accommodate his. Tara's room would be perfect. It's bigger, has better light, and she's hardly ever here anyway with all her work. The assumption in his voice, the casual dismissal of my existence, the way he gestured at my personal space like it was already his, it all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. They weren't asking. They weren't even informing. They were simply taking the way they'd always taken from me, expecting gratitude for the privilege of being useful to them. When were you planning to tell me? My voice cut through their planning sharp enough to make my mother jump. The paint swatches fluttered to the floor like dying butterflies. Oh, honey. My mother said, that false brightness in her tone that always preceded disappointment. We were just brainstorming. Nothing's decided yet. But the measuring tape in my father's hand and the nursery furniture catalog on my bed told a different story. The decision had been made the moment Sienna walked through our door. I was just the last to know, as always expected to smile and pack my life into boxes for the convenience of others. The garage renovation was their idea of compromise. After what my father called a family meeting, where I sat silent while they explained why Brady and Sienna needed my room, they presented the garage conversion like they were doing me a favor. My father spent a weekend installing a space heater that rattled when it ran and laying down cheap carpet remnants over the concrete floor. The edges didn't quite meet, leaving gaps where the cold concrete showed through like broken teeth. He worked with determined cheer, whistling off-key, while he hammered and measured, acting like he was creating something special, instead of relegating his daughter to a space meant for cars and lawn equipment. The extension cord he ran from the house for electricity was painted bright orange, a safety hazard wrapped in caution tape that nobody seemed to recognize as metaphor for my entire situation. My mother cheerfully hung curtains over the single window that faced the alley, fabric so thin that streetlight would filter through at night. She'd found them at a discount store, purple flowers on beige background, the kind of pattern you'd expect in a nursing home. "It's actually quite cozy," she said, not meeting my eyes as she adjusted the crooked curtain rod my father had installed at an angle. "Like a studio apartment, very trendy." They moved my bed out there along with a small dresser that wouldn't fit much, 3 drawers for 23 years of life, each one sticking when you tried to open it, requiring a special wiggle and pull technique I perfected through frustrated repetition. My closet became a portable wardrobe rack from a garage sale wheels, squeaking whenever I pushed it aside to access the boxes stacked behind. The bathroom situation was what revealed the true thoughtlessness of their plan. The bathroom was in the house, meaning I'd have to walk through the kitchen every time I needed to shower. They gave me a key to the back door, acting magnanimous about allowing me access to basic hygiene. "Just be considerate of everyone's schedules," my mother advised, as if I was the inconvenience in this arrangement. Winter mornings meant sprinting across frost-covered grass in my bathrobe, feet going numb in thin slippers. Summer nights meant mosquitoes following me inside the back door's broken screen, another item on the never-addressed repair list. Privacy became a luxury I could no longer afford my daily routines, subject to whoever might be in the kitchen when nature called. Brady and Sienna, meanwhile, transformed my former room with enthusiasm that bordered on manic. They painted over my carefully chosen sage green walls, with pastel yellow covering years of memories, with primer and promises of new beginnings. My mother documented every step on social media hashtags like Blessed Grandma Nursery Goals, accompanying photos where my belongings could be seen boxed in corners awaiting removal. The devastating twist came when I overheard Sienna on the phone with her friend while I was grabbing my work clothes from the laundry room. She stood on the back patio, voice carrying through the open window with crystalline clarity. "His parents are so gullible. Brady and I have been planning this for months. Free housing, free babysitting, and his sister is such a pushover, she'll probably help with night feedings from the garage." She laughed, the sound like glass breaking in my chest. "No, seriously, they put her in the actual garage. Can you believe it?" Brady said she wouldn't complain, and he was right. She just accepted it like she accepts everything. It's almost sad how desperate she is for their approval. We figure we can stay here at least 2 years, maybe 3, if we play it right. My hand stilled on my laundry basket work uniform, crushed in white-knuckled fists. The conversation continued, Sienna outlining their strategy like a general planning a campaign, how they'd gradually take over more of the house, how Brady would quit his part-time job to focus on fatherhood, how they'd manipulate my parents into paying for everything while I subsidized from the garage. The best part, Sienna's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried even clearer. They're already talking about the sister contributing more to household expenses once the baby comes. Brady's mom mentioned something about her helping with diapers and formula since she'll be right there in the garage anyway. It's genius. Something inside me finally snapped. Not broke. Breaking implies violent suddenness. This was more like the last fiber of a rope fraying after years of bearing weight it was never meant to carry. I stood in that laundry room holding clothes for a job I'd taken to help with family expenses, listening to strangers plan how to exploit my exploitation, and felt something fundamental shift. The pushover in the garage was about to push back. For 3 years, I'd been quietly saving every penny from my accounting job at a small firm downtown. While my family assumed I was barely scraping by, I'd actually developed a system that would have impressed them if they'd ever bothered to ask about my work. Automation had streamlined my tasks, allowing me to take on additional clients freelance. Every extra dollar went into a savings account at a bank across town, statements delivered electronically to an email address my family didn't know existed. The account balance had grown slowly, at first $20, here, $50 there. Lunch became peanut butter sandwiches eaten at my desk. New clothes were unnecessary when thrift stores provided professional wear for a fraction of retail. I learned to cut my own hair following YouTube tutorials in my room, now the garage, with scissors and determination. Every sacrifice added to the number that represented freedom. What my family didn't know was that I'd been taking online courses in forensic accounting, studying late into the night with headphones, while they assumed I was wasting time on social media. The garage actually provided unexpected privacy for this endeavor. No one bothered to visit the family member they'd relegated to storage, leaving me free to pursue education they would have dismissed as unnecessary. The certification exam had been scheduled for a Saturday when my parents were attending Mackenzie's sorority parent weekend. Brady was supposedly at a music festival, though his Instagram showed him at a local bar. I drove 2 hours to the testing center, hands steady on the wheel despite the magnitude of what passing would mean. 4 hours of questions that tested everything I'd learned, practical scenarios that drew on my real-world experience and theoretical knowledge, gained from midnight study sessions. I passed with a score that placed me in the top 5% nationally. The certificate arrived at my workplace where I'd had all important mail redirected after too many misplaced items at home. My supervisor noticed the achievement, mentioned it to his golf buddy, who happened to be a headhunter specializing in financial positions. One conversation led to another, connections forming a ladder I could finally climb. A headhunter had reached out about a position with a federal agency in Washington, D.C., offering triple my current salary. The initial email had seemed too good to be true, the kind of opportunity that happened to other people whose biggest achievements weren't used as kitchen scratch paper. But the follow-up call confirmed it was real, scheduling an interview that would require creative scheduling and careful lies. I'd gone through 3 rounds of interviews, all during my lunch breaks. The first was a phone screening in my car parked behind an abandoned strip mall where nobody would recognize me. I'd answered questions about my experience while watching pigeons fight over fast food wrappers, professional voice masking the surreal nature of interviewing for a life-changing position in a decade-old Toyota with a broken air conditioner. The second interview was a video call that required more creativity. I'd told my boss I had a dental emergency, then driven to Catherine's apartment, where the lighting was better and the background more professional than anything I could manage in the garage. She'd sat silently on the couch, giving thumbs-up encouragement while I discussed my qualifications with a panel of serious-faced federal employees who seemed impressed by my answers. The third and final interview happened the day before Brady announced Sienna's pregnancy. I'd called in sick, boarded a train before dawn, and arrived in D.C. wearing my best suit, the one I'd bought secondhand but had professionally tailored. The federal building was imposing all marble and security checkpoints, but I walked through those doors knowing I belonged there more than I'd ever belonged in my family's garage. The job offer had arrived via email the same day Brady made his announcement at dinner. While my parents fussed over Sienna's prenatal vitamins and Brady basked in congratulations for his impending fatherhood, I read the terms of my new position on my phone under the table. Starting salary that would triple my current income. Full benefits including health, dental, and vision. Moving expense reimbursement. A signing bonus larger than my current annual salary. The twist came when I discovered my mother had been accessing my mail. I'd returned to the garage after a particularly long shift to find things subtly rearranged. Nothing dramatic, just items shifted enough to show someone had been searching. My instincts, honed by years of protecting small privacies, led me to check the loose floorboard where I kept important documents. Everything was there but wrong papers reordered by someone who didn't know my system. The next day, I created a reason to visit my parents' room, returning laundry that had mysteriously appeared in my load. Their desk drawer was slightly open, an invitation I couldn't resist. Inside, I found opened bank statements from my local account, not the secret one, thankfully, with sticky notes calculating how much I could contribute to family expenses once the baby arrived. My mother's handwriting outlined a budget that allocated 70% of my assumed income to household costs. Rent for the garage was listed at market rate for a studio apartment. Utilities I barely used were divided equally among all residents, and a new line item labeled childcare contribution assumed I'd be available for 20 hours of babysitting per week. She'd been planning to present this as fait accompli, probably during some family meeting, where emotional manipulation would prevent protest. But she'd made her calculations based on my current salary, unaware that I'd soon be earning triple that amount in a city where nobody would expect me to subsidize their choices. The sticky notes might as well have been my emancipation papers, proof that I wasn't paranoid or selfish, but simply aware of my value in ways they'd never been. I carefully photographed everything before replacing it exactly as found, evidence for the future when gaslighting would inevitably follow my departure. Then I returned to my garage, sat on my squeaky bed, and began planning my vanishing act with the meticulous attention to detail that had earned me a federal job offer. They wanted to increase my rent. They were about to have a vacancy they couldn't fill. Moving day arrived faster than expected. My family bustled around the house with an energy I hadn't seen since Mackenzie's high school graduation. Brady actually woke up before noon directing the arrangement of baby furniture with the authority of someone who'd never assembled anything more complex than a sandwich. Sienna supervised from what used to be my reading chair hands, cradling her prosthetic belly while she issued commands about feng shui and energy flow. My parents worked like a choreographed team, my mother steaming curtains, while my father assembled the crib they'd bought without consulting anyone about the cost. $700 charged to the credit card they'd asked me to help pay down last month, claiming unexpected medical expenses. Now I understood where those expenses had really gone, into creating a nursery paradise for their golden son's questionable girlfriend. I carried box after box to the garage, each trip across the backyard feeling like a small funeral for the daughter they'd never really seen. 23 years of belongings didn't amount to much when compressed into cardboard and resignation. Photo albums from high school yearbooks where classmates had written about my bright future college textbooks I'd kept for reference, all relegated to a corner behind the lawnmower. Brady didn't lift a finger to help claiming his back hurt from his last gig, the same back that seemed fine when he'd been moving amplifiers into what used to be my closet, converting it into a recording booth for the music career that existed only in his imagination. He sat on the porch scrolling through his phone and occasionally shouting encouragement that felt more like mockery. "Looking good, Tara. The garage is really coming together. You'll have so much privacy out there." Privacy to be forgotten more accurately. Privacy to become invisible in a space that smelled of motor oil and fertilizer, no matter how many air fresheners my mother hung from the exposed beams. The concrete floor had already started seeping cold through the thin carpet, promising winters of numb feet and borrowed space heaters that would trip breakers if I ran them too high. Sienna directed the placement of her things with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. The nursery had to be perfect, she explained to my mother, because the baby's first visual experiences would shape their entire aesthetic sensibility. This from a woman who thought leopard print and sequins were appropriate breakfast attire. Her designer maternity clothes now hung in my former closet, pushing aside memories like they were last season's fashions. Mackenzie FaceTimed from college during lunch, gushing about becoming an aunt, while my mother held the phone up to show off the nursery transformation. My sister squealed over the crib mobile, the changing table, the rocking chair positioned exactly where my desk used to sit. Nobody turned the camera toward the garage where I was creating a makeshift home among gardening supplies and Christmas decorations. "This is so exciting," Mackenzie chirped through the screen. "I can't wait to babysit when I'm home for summer break." The assumption that she'd have fun aunt duties while I'd have obligations from the garage wasn't lost on me. The family dynamic had been established long ago. Mackenzie got experiences, Brady got excuses, and I got expectations. Now those expectations included being available childcare, despite being physically separated from the house proper. The shocking moment came at dinner when my father raised his glass for a toast. My mother had prepared Brady's favorite meal, pot roast with all the trimmings, the kind of elaborate spread usually reserved for holidays. Sienna had been given the seat I'd occupied for 2 decades, my usual spot now designated as too drafty for a pregnant woman. I sat at the corner, added like an afterthought when they realized the table setting was one short. "To new beginnings." My father said, his voice thick with emotion that had never appeared for any of my achievements. his eyes fixed on Brady and Sienna like they were visiting royalty instead of unemployed manipulators. To our growing family and the blessing of our first grandchild. Everyone raised their glasses, wine for most sparkling cider for Sienna, who made a production of abstaining for the baby. The clink of glass on glass sounded like doors closing, like opportunities ending, like the final notes of a song I'd never asked to play. And to Tara, he continued almost as an afterthought, turning toward me with the kind of smile you'd give a helpful stranger. For being so understanding about the garage, we knew we could count on you to make this sacrifice for family. Sacrifice. The word hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been burning my bridges for years. They saw my exile to the garage as a sacrifice I was making, not a transgression they were committing. In their narrative, I was the selfless sister enabling family harmony, not the discarded daughter making room for preferred children. Family helps family, Brady added, raising his glass higher. That's what makes us special, right, Tara? The expectation in his voice, the assumption of my agreement, the way everyone waited for me to validate their choices. It crystallized into perfect clarity. They weren't grateful for my sacrifice. They were grateful for my compliance, for my predictability, for my reliable willingness to shrink myself to accommodate their expansion. That's when I stood up, smiled, and said I needed to get something from the garage. The words came out calm, measured like I was reciting lines I'd rehearsed, which in a way I had been rehearsing for weeks in my head, planning for this exact moment when their disregard would finally push me past my breaking point. "Oh, before you go," my mother called out, already turning back to Sienna. "Could you move your car? Brady needs to park closer to the house for easier loading when they go to prenatal appointments." Even my parking spot was being reassigned. I nodded, still smiling, and walked out the back door. The cold air hit my face like clarity, sharp and undeniable. Behind me, I could hear them resuming their celebration, planning nursery decorations and baby names, building a future that assumed my perpetual availability and insignificance. I walked through the garage, past the boxes of my life stacked like grievances, past the bed that would stay empty tonight and every night after. My car keys were already in my pocket, my real life packed and waiting 3 blocks away at Catherine's house. The moving company had their instructions. The storage unit was paid for 3 months in advance, and my new apartment in D.C. was ready for occupancy. They thought I was getting something from the garage. They were right. I was getting my freedom, my dignity, and my life back. As I drove away, leaving my family car parked exactly where they'd asked me not to, I didn't look back. There was nothing in that rearview mirror worth seeing, just a house where I'd been a ghost long before I learned how to vanish. I'd planned everything meticulously. 3 weeks of preparation condensed into movements so precise, they felt choreographed. My car was already packed with my most important possessions parked 3 blocks away at my friend Catherine's house. 2 suitcases of professional clothes, my laptop, important documents, photo albums that actually included me, and the ceramic mug my grandmother had given me before she died. The one thing in that house that had been truly mine. Catherine had been my co-conspirator without knowing the full scope of my plans. When I'd asked to store some boxes in her garage temporarily, she'd agreed without question. When I'd mentioned needing to park my car there for a few days due to construction, she'd handed me her spare gate remote. She knew something was wrong at home, but respected my privacy enough not to pry offering support through actions rather than interrogation. A moving company would collect the items I'd secretly marked in the garage the next morning while everyone was out. Small stickers invisible, unless you knew to look, decorated boxes containing things worth keeping. The movers had specific instructions and a narrow window. 10 to 11 in the morning when my mother would be at her book club, my father at work, and Brady would definitely still be unconscious. Sienna had prenatal yoga at that time, a class she'd never missed according to her very public social media schedule. My phone was turned off the SIM card already removed and tucked into my wallet like evidence of a crime. The new phone, purchased with cash at a store 2 towns over, had only essential numbers programmed. My new employer's HR department, Catherine's cell, and the property management company for my DC apartment. No family, no obligations, no electronic leash they could use to track or guilt me home. The drive began at 7:43 p.m., time to avoid the evening traffic that might slow my escape. I'd memorized the route, studied alternate paths, even checked weather reports to ensure clear roads. Every detail mattered when you were erasing yourself from a life that had never really included you anyway. The highway entrance ramp felt like a portal between worlds. Behind me, the garage and ghosts. Ahead, possibility and personhood. I'd left strategic evidence of my continued presence to buy time. A light on a timer in the garage would flicker on at 9 p.m., visible from the kitchen window. My work clothes for Monday were laid out on the rickety dresser shoes placed beneath, like I'd returned to fill them. Even my toothbrush remained in the bathroom, a prop in the performance of pretending I still lived there. The first rest stop came after 2 hours of driving. I pulled into the well-lit area, chose a parking spot near the building, and sat for a moment in the silence that felt louder than any family dinner. My old phone powered off for the journey, beckoned from the glove compartment. One last check, one final glimpse at the life I was leaving behind. The twist came 6 hours into my drive when I stopped at a rest area and turned on my old phone one last time. The screen exploded with notifications, a digital avalanche of sudden concern from people who'd barely acknowledged my existence 12 hours ago. 47 missed calls, dozens of texts ranging from confusion to anger to commands, masquerading as worry. Voicemails stacked like accusations waiting to be heard. I scrolled through the text preview without opening any. My mother's progression from irritation to panic played out in truncated sentences. Where did you go became this isn't funny, became your father is worried, became call immediately. Brady's messages were shorter, more entitled. Get back here. Stop being dramatic. You're ruining everything. The last voicemail was from my mother, her voice pitched high with indignation disguised as concern. Where are you? Sienna's having contractions, and we need you to drive her to the hospital. Brady's too nervous. Call immediately. Too nervous to drive his pregnant girlfriend to the hospital, but not too nervous to knock her up and move her into my bedroom. The expectation that I'd abandon my dramatic exit to serve as their chauffeur was so perfectly characteristic that I almost laughed. Even in my absence, I was expected to be useful to prioritize their manufactured emergencies over my actual life. I deleted everything without listening to the rest. Each swipe felt like surgery removing malignant expectations that had metastasized throughout my life. The call log cleared, the text threads vanished, the voicemails evaporated into digital nothing. Then I removed the SIM card holding the small chip up to the rest stop's harsh fluorescent lighting. Such a tiny thing to represent such enormous control. This sliver of plastic and metal had been their hotline to my compliance, their tether to pull whenever they needed something. Now it was just trash, indistinguishable from any other piece of litter. I dropped it in the garbage can next to empty coffee cups and fast food wrappers, the mundane end to an extraordinary leap. Back in my car, I programmed my new phone's GPS for the final leg to DC. The address of my new apartment complex appeared on screen like a promise. Studio apartment 4B in a building with controlled access and neighbors who didn't know I'd ever lived in a garage. The property manager had texted earlier confirming my keys would be available at the front desk no matter how late I arrived. As I merged back onto the highway, the city lights of my old life faded in the rearview mirror like dying stars. Somewhere behind me, my family was discovering that their most reliable resource had finally been depleted. The garage would be empty tomorrow, just oil stains and the ghost of compliance they'd never bothered to appreciate. But I was already miles ahead, driving toward a federal job that valued my skills and an apartment where I'd never have to sprint through frost for a shower. The vanishing act was complete before they'd even noticed the show had started. Catherine later told me what happened next, piecing together the chaos from social media posts, neighborhood gossip, and one memorable encounter at the grocery store. She became my inadvertent spy, gathering intelligence on the aftermath of my disappearance while maintaining an Oscar-worthy performance of confused concern. Her report delivered during our weekly video calls painted a picture of escalating panic disguised as righteous indignation. My family had called her repeatedly that first night, the landline and her cell phone ringing in alternating patterns, like some desperate Morse code. She'd been in bed actually asleep, unlike my parents, who were discovering what happened when their most dependable child finally decided to stop being dependable. The doorbell at midnight had been the final straw. "Your mother looked like she'd aged 5 years in 5 hours," Catherine recounted during one of our calls. "Hair uncombed, makeup smeared, wearing mismatched shoes. Your father stood behind her in his work clothes, still holding his car keys like he'd been driving around searching for you. She played dumb, expressing concern and offering to help look for me. The performance required balancing believable worry with careful ignorance. Yes, she'd seen me recently. No, I hadn't mentioned any travel plans. Of course, she'd call if she heard anything." The lies flowed easier than she'd expected, lubricated by years of watching my family lie to themselves about my value. The police said I was an adult who'd left voluntarily. This determination came after a welfare check at my workplace, where my supervisor confirmed I'd submitted resignation paperwork 2 weeks prior. Professional notice, accumulated vacation payout, even a forwarding address for tax documents, though that led only to a P.O. box in another state. No signs of foul play, no indication of mental distress, just an adult exercising their right to relocate. "Your mother tried to file a missing persons report anyway," Catherine said, barely suppressing laughter. "The officer apparently asked if you'd taken your belongings and car. When she said yes, he suggested family counseling instead of a police investigation. My mother found my resignation letter at my former workplace when she showed up during Monday's lunch rush, demanding answers from anyone who'd listen. The marketing firm's receptionist, trained in discretion, simply confirmed I no longer worked there and directed all questions to HR. But my mother's public hysteria in the lobby became water cooler gossip that Catherine heard through her network of professional contacts. My father discovered I'd removed myself from the family phone plan when he tried to track my device location. The customer service representative explained that I'd ported my number to a new carrier 3 weeks ago, authorization confirmed through security questions only I could answer. The family plan now cost more without my line and irony that probably escaped him in the moment of realization that their digital surveillance had been severed. The shocking twist came when Brady went to my bank to see if I'd been accessing my accounts, only to be arrested on outstanding warrants for unpaid child support from a previous relationship. Catherine witnessed this personally, having gone to the same bank to deposit a check. She described the scene with barely contained glee. Brady in handcuffs, Sienna shrieking about contractions, my parents arriving, just in time to watch their golden boy get placed in a patrol car. "Apparently he owes $12,000 in back support to some woman in Nevada," Catherine explained. "She'd been looking for him for 2 years. Your disappearance triggered all sorts of attention people calling about you, who then recognized Brady from social media. Turns out Sienna wasn't his first pregnant girlfriend, and his ex had been searching with the dedication of a bounty hunter. My vanishing act had inadvertently shined a spotlight on the family, bringing scrutiny they'd never experienced when I was there absorbing all their responsibilities. The police visit about my welfare had led to Brady's name being run through the system, warrants popping up like carnival prizes nobody wanted to win. The irony was delicious. My disappearance, which they'd probably expected to last a day or two before I came crawling back, had instead exposed the rot they'd been hiding behind my reliability. Without me, there to handle things, to smooth over problems, to pay bills and maintain the facade of functionality, their house of cards began its inevitable collapse. "Your mother posted on Facebook asking if anyone had seen you," Catherine continued. "The comments section turned into a mess. People asking why you were living in the garage, why Brady got your room, whether they'd been charging you rent. Someone even mentioned seeing the moving truck at your house and wondering if you'd been evicted." The narrative they'd crafted, loving family, supportive parents, close siblings, crumbled under public scrutiny. Questions they'd never had to answer when I was quietly managing their dysfunction now demanded responses. Where was their middle daughter? Why had she left? What kind of parents put their child in a garage? My absence created a vacuum that sucked in. Consequences they'd been avoiding for years. Brady's arrest was just the beginning. Without my financial contribution, bills went unpaid. Without my presence as buffer and caretaker, they had to actually deal with each other. Without my silence protecting their reputation, people started asking uncomfortable questions. The 11 p.m. knock on Catherine's door 3 nights after I left was my father alone, looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. He asked if she truly didn't know where I was, his voice breaking on the question. When she maintained her ignorance, he handed her an envelope. "If you hear from her," he said quietly, "please give her this." Catherine waited until he'd driven away to open it. Inside was a check for $500 and a note in his shaky handwriting for gas money to come home. Even faced with my absolute absence, they could only conceptualize my departure as a tantrum requiring minor appeasement. $500 to pretend the garage had been acceptable, that my sacrifice had been appreciated, that coming home meant anything other than resuming my role as their foundation. Catherine kept the letter but burned the check in her sink, sending me a photo of the ashes with the caption, "Your price has been set." We laughed about it during our next call, but there was sadness beneath the humor. $500. 23 years of being their support system, their safety net, their forgotten middle child, and my father thought I could be purchased back for less than a month's rent in my new city. But I was no longer for sale at any price, and they were finally learning what happened when you took your foundations for granted. Eventually, the whole structure fell down. My new life in D.C. was everything I dreamed of during those long nights in the garage, listening to possums scratch through the garbage cans outside my window. The federal agency job came with a badge that opened doors both literal and metaphorical, granting access to buildings of importance and rooms where decisions mattered. My supervisor, Janet Chen, was the kind of mentor I'd never known I needed. Someone who valued competence over compliance and recognized talent without requiring self-sacrifice. The orientation process took 2 weeks, during which I learned systems and protocols that made my previous job look like children's games. Real databases with serious implications, financial tracking that helped prevent fraud on a national scale, investigations that protected taxpayer dollars from those who would steal them. Every morning I dressed in clothes that hadn't absorbed garage odors and commuted on a metro system that ran with beautiful precision. My studio apartment was a revelation of what housing could be when it was actually designed for human habitation. Located on the 3rd floor of a pre-war building that had been lovingly restored, it featured exposed brick walls that were intentional, not symptomatic of crumbling infrastructure. Tall windows stretched nearly floor to ceiling, flooding the space with natural light that didn't filter through dirty glass and water-stained curtains. The building offered amenities I'd never imagined having access to. A fitness center where I could run on treadmills without dodging lawn equipment, a rooftop terrace with city views that made my soul expand, a laundry room where machines worked without requiring strategic kicks and prayers. My neighbors were young professionals who nodded politely in hallways and never once asked me to babysit their children for free. I furnished the apartment slowly, each purchase a small celebration of independence. A bed frame that lifted my mattress off the floor, unlike the garage where moisture was a constant concern. A desk positioned to catch morning sun, where I could work on advanced certifications without hiding my ambitions. Kitchen equipment that allowed me to cook real meals, not just microwave dinners eaten standing up to avoid family commentary. Meanwhile, Catherine kept me informed about the chaos back home through carefully curated updates. Without my steady rent payments, which I discovered had been nearly 40% of the household income, my parents struggled with the mortgage. The adjustable rate they'd agreed to when refinancing for Mackenzie's education had kicked in at the worst possible moment, monthly payments jumping by $600, just as their reliable tenant disappeared. Sienna's pregnancy complications required expensive treatments not covered by insurance. Catherine forwarded me screenshots from social media where my mother had started a GoFundMe explaining their hardships without mentioning why their daughter had vanished. The donations were minimal, mostly from distant relatives, who included comments asking pointed questions about family dynamics. The stunning twist came when Mackenzie's college called about unpaid tuition. The bursar's office had been patient through previous delays, accepting partial payments and elaborate excuse narratives. But with the spring semester approaching and the previous balance still outstanding, they required full payment, or Mackenzie would be unable to register for classes essential to her graduation. My parents had been using my rent money to cover her expenses, a financial shell game that required my continued participation. They'd assumed I'd never leave, never demand more, never stop being the silent funding source for their preferred children's dreams. The house of cards they'd built on my reliability couldn't stand without its foundational support. Mackenzie had to take out emergency loans. Catherine reported during one of our evening calls. Your mother posted about it being a temporary setback and how family pulls together in tough times. The comments were not supportive. The community that had once viewed my parents as successful middle-class pillars began seeing cracks in the facade. Why was their son arrested? Why was their middle daughter missing? Why couldn't they afford commitments they'd publicly celebrated making? The narrative of loving family collapsed under scrutiny, leaving behind the truth of dysfunction and favoritism. My work in D.C. provided perfect distraction from their distant drama, days filled with meaningful tasks analyzing financial patterns that revealed fraud schemes protecting vulnerable populations from predatory practices. My colleagues respected my insights, valued my contributions, included me in after-work gatherings where nobody expected me to pay for everyone's drinks or disappear when more interesting people arrived. One evening, my supervisor called me into her office. The frosted glass door closed behind me with professional weight, unlike the garage's thin door that never properly latched. Janet gestured to a chair across from her organized desk, her expression serious but not concerning. Your work on the Morrison case was exceptional. She began referring to a complex fraud investigation I'd untangled through careful analysis. Pattern recognition that experienced analysts missed, the kind of detail orientation that makes differences in federal cases. Pride swelled in my chest, an unfamiliar sensation after years of accomplishments being dismissed or attributed to others. Here was recognition based on merit, not manipulation, appreciation for actual contribution, not just compliance with expectations. There's a multi-agency task force being assembled. Janet continued sliding a folder across the desk. Healthcare fraud specifically targeting pregnancy-related scams. It's a growing problem that drains resources from legitimate medical needs. I'd like to recommend you for the team. I opened the folder, scanning the briefing materials with professional interest that suddenly sharpened into personal recognition. The examples included exactly the kind of schemes Sienna had bragged about on that phone call. False pregnancies, manipulated ultrasounds, insurance fraud through fictional complications. My stomach tightened with the peculiar sensation of personal and professional lives intersecting. I'm interested, I managed to say with steady voice, though my mind raced with implications. When would this start? Next week. You'll be working with investigators from FBI insurance companies' state medical boards. High-profile stuff that makes real differences. Fraudsters stealing from programs meant for actual pregnant women and infants. Janet's disgust was evident, matching my own emerging understanding. I accepted the position, signed the additional clearance paperwork, and left her office with a folder that might eventually lead back to my family's doorstep. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of poetic justice that matched my own. I'd left to escape being used only to find myself in position to investigate users. That night in my apartment, I sat at my desk overlooking city lights that sparkled with possibility. The contrast between this view and the alley-facing garage window was stark. There I'd seen garbage cans and overgrown weeds. Here I saw a future where my skills mattered, where my contribution was valued, where my absence created consequences for those who'd taken my presence for granted. Catherine texted near midnight, "Your mom showed up at my work today. Security had to escort her out. She's getting desperate." I set the phone aside without responding, focusing instead on the briefing materials for my new assignment. Somewhere in those pages might be the very scheme playing out in my childhood home. But that was their problem now. I had work to do, a life to build, and a future that didn't include enabling anyone's dysfunction, but my own recovery. 3 months into my new job, I was fully integrated into the multi-agency task force investigating healthcare fraud. Our workspace occupied an entire floor of a federal building, computers displaying interconnected webs of false claims, forged documents, and financial trails that revealed the scope of organized medical deception. My desk faced a window overlooking the Potomac, a view that still made me pause sometimes, remembering the garage's single window onto an alley where stray cats fought over territory. My supervisor praised my attention to detail and ability to spot financial irregularities that others missed. Years of tracking every penny of making $20 stretch to cover a week's lunches had given me intimate knowledge of how people manipulated money when desperate. But these fraudsters weren't desperate. They were greedy, stealing from programs designed to help genuinely pregnant women and new mothers access health care. The pattern recognition skills I developed came from unexpected sources. Watching my family's financial gymnastics had taught me how people justified theft, how they rationalized taking what wasn't theirs, how they created elaborate narratives to excuse exploitation. Every scheme we uncovered echoed smaller deceptions I'd witnessed. Brady's mysterious music equipment purchases appearing right after my contributions to household expenses. Mackenzie's sorority dues somehow covered despite my parents' claims of poverty. The universe has a strange sense of humor. While reviewing suspicious billing patterns from multiple states flagged by our algorithm for impossible overlaps, the same patient apparently receiving prenatal care in 3 locations simultaneously, I recognized a name, Sienna Martinez. The blood in my veins seemed to pause, then resume at double speed. I forced professional detachment while pulling her complete file history. She'd been flagged for submitting claims to multiple insurance companies for the same pregnancy-related procedures. The addresses varied, but the treatment descriptions were identical down to the same typing errors. Ultrasounds dated weeks apart showed identical measurements impossible unless fetal development had simply stopped. The deeper I dug, the more I found. False addresses using real apartment buildings but non-existent unit numbers, forged physician signatures that didn't match any licensed providers in those states. The prosthetic belly suddenly made sense. The convenient complications requiring expensive treatments. The urgency to secure free housing before her con unraveled. She wasn't just scamming insurance companies. She was scamming families stupid enough to take her in providing room and board, while she collected fraudulent payments for a pregnancy that existed only in paperwork and pretense. Professional protocol required me to report findings without bias, to present evidence without personal connection. I documented everything meticulously, creating a file that would withstand any legal scrutiny. The evidence spoke for itself. Forged documents, impossible timelines, financial patterns that revealed systematic fraud across state lines, federal crimes with mandatory sentences. But the shocking revelation came when I discovered she wasn't even pregnant. Cross-referencing medical databases accessible through our investigation revealed no legitimate prenatal care, no hospital registrations, no actual medical history supporting pregnancy. She'd been using a prosthetic belly and falsified ultrasound images purchased from an online black market that specialized in such deceptions. The same site sold fake pregnancy tests, artificial hormone supplements to mimic symptoms, even coaching videos on how to perform the perfect pregnancy con. Brady was either her accomplice or the most gullible person alive. As I compiled evidence, I discovered similar schemes in 2 other states. Young men with family resources, vulnerable parents, eager for grandchildren homes with extra rooms and bleeding hearts. The pattern was consistent. Meet struggling musician or artist, create whirlwind romance, announce unexpected pregnancy, secure housing and support milk, the situation until exposed or bored, then vanish to repeat elsewhere. My fingers trembled slightly as I prepared the report not from emotion, but from the surreal intersection of personal history and professional duty. The woman who'd stolen my bedroom was about to lose her freedom. The family who'd chosen her comfort over mine would face public humiliation. The brother who'd deemed me expendable would discover he'd been played by someone playing his own game better than he ever could. I submitted my findings through official channels, maintaining professional distance despite the personal connection. My supervisor reviewed the file, complimented the thorough documentation, and initiated formal investigation procedures. Within hours, multiple agencies were coordinating, preparing for simultaneous actions across 3 states where Sienna had active operations running. That evening, Catherine called with updates from the home front. "Your parents hired a private investigator to find you," she said, barely suppressing laughter. "He showed up at my door with your high school yearbook photo asking if I'd seen you recently. I told him to check the federal employee directory." The investigator, apparently more competent than my family, had likely already discovered my new position. But federal employment came with protections, privacy laws that prevented harassment security protocols that kept personal information compartmentalized. They could know I worked for the government without knowing where I lived, how to contact me, or what I did beyond a vague job title. "Oh, and Brady's been doing odd jobs to pay for a lawyer," Catherine continued. "Painting houses, moving furniture, actual work for the first time in his life. Sienna keeps having medical emergencies that require him to leave jobs early. His boss at the moving company told him not to come back." The irony was delicious. Brady experiencing the consequences of unreliability, of putting personal drama above professional obligations, of expecting others to cover his responsibilities. Every missed shift was a small echo of every family dinner where I'd worked late to cover expenses while he pursued his dreams on my dime. The investigation moved swiftly. Federal healthcare fraud was a priority crime, resources allocated quickly to prevent further theft from legitimate medical programs. I watched from professional distance as the case built evidence, accumulated warrants, prepared. Sienna Martinez would be arrested at my parents' house during what should have been Sunday dinner. The same table where they'd toasted my exile to the garage would witness her handcuffing. My work was done, filed and processed through appropriate channels. Whatever happened next would unfold without my direct involvement, justice served by systems larger than family dysfunction. I closed the case file, shut down my computer, and prepared for the commute home to an apartment where nobody expected me to solve their problems or subsidize their schemes. The train ride gave time for reflection. 3 months ago, I'd been sleeping in a garage deemed worthless, except for my wallet and willingness to sacrifice. Now I was a federal investigator whose work protected taxpayer dollars and vulnerable populations from predators. The transformation felt surreal, but earned each accomplishment building on skills developed through adversity. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Wine tonight, I have stories you won't believe." I smiled, agreeing to meet at the wine bar, equidistant between our apartments. Friends who chose my company, who valued my presence beyond utility, who celebrated my successes instead of diminishing them. The family I'd built was smaller but stronger than the one I'd escaped. As the train carried me home, I thought about Sunday dinners yet to come. My parents' table would have empty chairs, their garage would house only cars, and clutter their golden children would face consequences without buffers. But my table, small as it was, would hold food. I'd chosen wine, I'd selected conversations where my voice mattered. The investigation was complete, but my life had just begun. I submitted my findings through official channels, maintaining professional distance despite the personal connection. Every document meticulously prepared, every piece of evidence properly cataloged, every procedural requirement followed to the letter. The report was perfect, clean, objective, and devastating in its thoroughness. My supervisor reviewed it with the kind of impressed expression that had become familiar over these months, though she had no idea she was looking at the systematic destruction of my brother's elaborate delusion. The investigation moved swiftly. Federal agencies don't hesitate when healthcare fraud crosses state lines, when taxpayer dollars meant for legitimate medical care get siphoned into criminal pockets. Within 48 hours, warrants were issued. Coordination meetings happened in conference rooms where I sat quietly taking notes, while agents planned simultaneous raids across 3 states. They spoke of suspects and locations with clinical detachment, unaware that one address had been my home for 23 years. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made D.C. beautiful. I spent the morning at the farmer's market selecting apples and artisanal cheese, living a life so removed from my family's drama it felt fictional. But I knew that at exactly 6 p.m. Eastern Time, law enforcement would be knocking on doors in 3 states, serving warrants, seizing evidence, and arresting a woman who'd turned pregnancy into a profession of deception. Sienna was arrested at my parents' house during what should have been Sunday dinner. I learned the details later through official channels and Catherine's breathless recounting. Federal agents had timed it perfectly. The family gathered around the table I'd once occupied pot roast growing cold as handcuffs clicked around wrists that had never contributed anything but manipulation. The scene, as Catherine heard from neighbors who'd witnessed through windows and later gossiped at the grocery store, was pure chaos. Sienna had tried to run, apparently forgetting that pregnancy tends to impede sprinting. Her prosthetic belly had shifted during the attempted escape, sliding sideways in a way that finally revealed the truth to my oblivious family. She'd crashed into the china cabinet my mother had inherited from her mother, shattering 3 generations of careful preservation in seconds. Brady's reaction revealed the truth with stunning clarity. Instead of defending his pregnant girlfriend, instead of expressing outrage at the arrest of his child's mother, he'd immediately started shouting about being deceived. "I didn't know," became his refrain, repeated loudly enough for neighbors to hear through walls that had never been properly insulated. "She told me she was pregnant. I believed her." The twist came when investigators found evidence on his laptop of similar schemes targeting other families. While Brady proclaimed innocence, his search history told different stories. Forums about pregnancy scams, websites selling fake ultrasounds, discussions about insurance fraud penalties. He'd known, or at least suspected, but the free ride was too comfortable to question. His complicity was written in browser cookies and cached pages, digital breadcrumbs leading straight to conspiracy charges. They'd done this before moving from state to state like invasive species, preying on parents eager for grandchildren and too trusting to verify medical claims. 7 families across 5 states each, believing they were supporting their son's pregnant girlfriend, each providing housing and money and emotional investment in babies that existed only in imagination and insurance paperwork. My childhood home became a crime scene. Yellow tape crossed the doorway I'd walked through thousands of times, agents carrying boxes of evidence from rooms where I'd been deemed unworthy of space. My mother's tearful call to Catherine came at midnight, voice broken with humiliation and confusion. How did we not see this? How did Tara know to leave? She still didn't understand that I'd left because of them, not because I'd suspected fraud. In her mind, my departure was prescient rather than self-preservation. The idea that I'd fled their treatment rather than Sienna's schemes was too painful to consider, so she revised history to make my absence about avoiding crime rather than avoiding cruelty. The local news picked up the story with enthusiasm. Federal healthcare fraud ring. Busted in quiet suburban home, made for compelling headlines. Reporters stood on the lawn I'd mowed every Saturday interviewing neighbors who suddenly remembered suspicious activities they'd never thought to report. Mrs. Patterson from across the street mentioned the strange packages delivered at odd hours. Mr. Jacobson recalled seeing Brady and Sienna loading boxes into cars at dawn. My parents aged years in days. Photos from the news showed them leaving the federal building after Brady's arraignment, my mother clutching my father's arm like she might dissolve without support. They'd mortgaged their reputation along with their house, and both were now in foreclosure. The community that had once viewed them as pillars saw only scandalized entertainment their fall, from grace measured in whispers at school board meetings, and suddenly declined dinner invitations. Mackenzie dropped out of college to come home furious that her parents had mortgaged her future for Brady's lies. The emergency loans she'd taken came with predatory interest rates, her desperation making her easy prey for financial vultures. She took a job at a local restaurant, the same one where she'd celebrated her college acceptance just 4 years earlier. The circle from promise to mundanity was complete, her dreams as shattered as the China Brady's fake girlfriend had destroyed. Catherine visited the restaurant where Mackenzie worked, ordering coffee and observing my younger sister's transformation from spoiled princess to exhausted server. "She looks rough," Catherine reported, hair in a messy ponytail, makeup barely covering the circles under her eyes. "She didn't recognize me at first, then seemed scared I might mention you." The Golden children were learning what I'd always known: that work was hard, that money was earned, not given, that consequences couldn't be avoided through charm or manipulation. Every double shift Mackenzie worked was a lesson in the reality I'd lived while funding her fantasies. Every rejection letter from universities unwilling to accept students with outstanding debt was a crash course in limitations I'd navigated while she lived limitless. My father, aged 10 years and 2 months, his pride shattered by public humiliation that no garage renovation could fix. He'd built his identity on being a provider, a patriarch who guided his family through middle-class success. Now he was the man whose son was arrested for fraud, whose daughter had vanished, whose house sheltered criminals instead of grandchildren. The narrative he'd crafted over decades had crumbled in weeks. The shocking twist came when Catherine told me they'd rented out the garage to a college student for extra income. The same space they'd deemed good enough for their daughter was now generating the money they desperately needed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, especially the neighbors who remembered seeing me carry boxes to that concrete cave. They charged the student $800 a month for what they'd given me as a twisted favor, finally recognizing the space's monetary value, if not its emotional cruelty. The student lasted 3 weeks, Catherine added with dark satisfaction. Complained about the cold, the dampness, the fact that you have to go through the house to use the bathroom. Your parents had to return his deposit. Even strangers wouldn't tolerate what they'd expected me to endure. The garage sat empty again, a monument to their misjudgment, while they struggled to make mortgage payments without rental income. The space heater my father had installed so proudly had broken, the cheap carpet had molded from moisture, and the curtains my mother hung had been torn down by the departed student who called them depressing. Brady was out on bail, living in his old room while a stranger's rejection of the garage mocked their family values. He'd gained weight, lost his musician swagger, and developed a nervous tic of checking over his shoulder. The golden boy who'd never faced consequences was drowning in them. Each court date, another wave pushing him further from the shore of his delusions. "Your mother still asks about you?" Catherine said during our weekly call. "She corners people at the grocery store, showing your old photo, asking if anyone's heard from you. It's desperate and sad and completely predictable." But I was beyond their reach, protected by federal privacy laws and the distance I'd created through deliberate action. The investigation continued without my direct involvement, my initial report spawning broader inquiries into pregnancy fraud networks. My work had value beyond personal vindication. It protected real pregnant women from having resources stolen by criminals. That night, I sat in my apartment reviewing case files for new investigations, each one an opportunity to prevent fraud rather than enable it. Through my window, city lights sparkled with promise rather than pain. Somewhere in a suburban house with yellow tape residue on the doorframes, my family was learning what happened when foundations crumbled. But I was building something new, something solid, something that would never require anyone to sleep in a garage, unless they chose to, unless they paid fair market value, unless they understood that space, like respect, had worth that couldn't be assumed. 8 months after I'd vanished into the October night, my supervisor, Janet Chen, called me into her corner office with windows overlooking Constitution Avenue. Spring had arrived in D.C. cherry blossoms, creating pink snow that drifted past our building, like nature's celebration of renewal. I sat across from her desk notepad, ready expecting another case assignment. The Sienna Martinez investigation had concluded with multiple convictions, my work cited as instrumental in breaking apart a fraud ring that had stolen over $2 million from healthcare systems. Exceptional work continues to define your tenure here. Janet began, her fingers steepled in the gesture I'd learned meant significant news was coming. Your ability to identify patterns others miss to document with precision that holds up in court to maintain objectivity despite personal connections. She knew. Of course she knew. Federal background checks were thorough. My family connections to the Martinez case would have been flagged and reviewed, but she'd never mentioned it, allowing me to prove my professionalism through actions rather than explanations. There's an opportunity I want to discuss. She continued, sliding a folder across the mahogany desk. We're establishing a new regional office focusing on healthcare fraud in the Mid-Atlantic region, Baltimore base covering Pennsylvania through North Carolina. The position of deputy director is available, and I can't think of anyone better suited. I opened the folder with steady hands that had learned not to tremble at life-changing moments. The salary made my current earnings look modest. The responsibilities included building a team, establishing protocols, interfacing with state agencies, real authority to make systematic changes, to prevent the kind of fraud that had invaded my childhood home. The location, I said, carefully calculating distances in my head. It's 90 minutes from your hometown, yes. Janet's expression remained neutral. Is that a problem? The old Tara would have seen it as a problem, would have run from any proximity to the pain. But 8 months of building a life on my own terms had created someone different, someone who could face the past without being diminished by it, who could exist in the same state without being pulled back into old patterns. No, I answered, meaning it. It's not a problem. Good. I'll need your decision by Friday. Take time to consider it fully. This kind of advancement comes with visibility pressure expectations. You'd be among the youngest deputy directors in the agency's history. I left her office with the folder that could redefine my future yet again. The metro ride home gave space for contemplation, the rhythmic movement of the train like a meditation on how far I'd traveled from that garage. Every station we passed marked distance from who I'd been, progressed toward who I was becoming. That evening, Catherine and I met at our usual wine bar. She'd become my closest friend through this journey, the keeper of secrets and provider of intelligence. Over a bottle of Bordeaux that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month, I told her about the promotion opportunity. You have to take it, she said immediately. Not because it brings you closer to them, but because it's what you've earned. Don't let their presence in the same geographic region diminish your achievements. She was right, of course. I'd spent too many years making decisions based on their comfort. This choice would be about my growth, my career, my future. The fact that it placed me within driving distance of their chaos was incidental, not instrumental. The twist came when I discovered my former employer had been investigated for embezzlement. The small accounting firm where I'd worked for 3 years, underpaid and overworked, had been cooking its own books while I'd been meticulously maintaining client accounts. My documentation from years of careful work had protected me from any suspicion, but the owner faced serious charges. He'd been stealing from clients while paying employees like me minimum wage, funding a lifestyle that included boats and vacation homes, while I'd counted pennies for gas money. The investigation revealed systematic theft going back a decade, meaning every year I'd struggled to survive on poverty wages. He'd been stealing enough to pay me fairly 5 times over. My testimony would be crucial to the case, and my family would surely hear about it. The local newspaper had picked up the story, connecting various threads of financial crime in our small city. My name would appear in court documents as a witness. My new federal position would be mentioned. My success would be impossible to hide. Catherine showed me screenshots from social media where the gossip had already started. Former employee of convicted embezzler, now federal investigator, had a nice ring to it. Comments speculated about whether I'd known, whether I'd reported him, whether my new career was connected to my old job's crimes. The truth, that I'd simply worked honestly while surrounded by thieves, was too simple for conspiracy-minded suburbanites. My mother had posted a response that Catherine read aloud. "Tara always was good with numbers. We're so proud of her success." The audacity of claiming pride while I'd been sleeping in a garage made us both laugh bitter wine on our tongues. She was rewriting history, again creating a narrative where they'd supported my career instead of exploiting it. But the real reckoning came through Mackenzie. She'd reached out to Catherine not to find me, but to understand me. Working restaurant shifts had taught her what I'd known all along, that money was earned through exhaustion, that dreams required funding, that parents who promised everything while taking everything were worse than absent. She wanted to know how you did it, Catherine told me. How you worked 2 jobs while going to school, how you saved money when they took most of your income, how you found the strength to leave. Mackenzie had discovered our parents' tax returns while gathering documents for her own financial aid appeals. The truth was written in federal forms. They'd claimed me as a dependent for years after I'd been supporting myself, collecting refunds that legally belonged to me. $3,000 here, $4,000 there, year after year of theft disguised as parenting. The garage had been planned long before Sienna arrived. They'd been waiting for an excuse to physically marginalize me the way they'd already emotionally abandoned me. Brady's fake pregnant girlfriend had simply provided convenient cover for cruelty they'd been contemplating for years. "She has evidence," Catherine said carefully. "Documents, recordings, messages between your parents discussing how to get more money out of you. She says Brady was planning to sue you for abandonment and emotional distress that supposedly caused his legal troubles." The absurdity made me laugh, real laughter that echoed through the wine bar. Brady, who'd never worked an honest day, claiming I'd abandoned him. Brady, who'd stolen my bedroom for a criminal, claiming emotional distress. The same legal system that had arrested him for fraud would have laughed him out of court. But Mackenzie had recordings of Brady admitting to knowing about Sienna's scheme, laughing about how they'd all played me for years. She'd been building her own evidence file, learning from my example, even when she hadn't known she was studying. The baby of the family had grown up fast when the safety net disappeared. "She wants to meet," Catherine said finally, "not to reconcile with them, but to understand you, to maybe have one family relationship that isn't built on exploitation." I considered this while finishing my wine. Mackenzie had been spoiled, but not cruel, thoughtless, but not malicious. She'd participated in the family dynamic that had made me invisible, but she'd been a child following her parents' lead. Now she was 22, working doubles to pay for loans she'd never expected to carry, learning what I'd known since adolescence. "Tell her I'll think about it," I decided, but not yet, not until I'm settled in Baltimore. Because I'd already decided to take the promotion. The deputy director position wasn't about proximity to them, but about progression from them. I'd build something important in the city where they'd diminished me, create value in the region where they deemed me worthless. My success would exist independent of their acknowledgement, my worth determined by federal pay grades rather than family hierarchies. That night, I emailed Janet my acceptance. By Friday, the paperwork was processed. By month's end, I'd be establishing a new office dedicated to preventing exactly the kind of fraud that had invaded my childhood. The irony was perfect. The forgotten daughter in the garage becoming the federal authority on healthcare crime. My family would inevitably learn about my position. Small cities loved gossip about local kids made good, especially when those kids had vanished dramatically. They'd probably claim credit, say they'd always known I was destined for greatness, conveniently forgetting the garage and the exploitation and the assumption I'd never leave. But their opinions no longer mattered. The reckoning wasn't about them recognizing my worth. It was about me recognizing theirs. They were small people who'd made small choices, who'd traded their daughter's dignity for a con artist's comfort. The real reckoning was that I'd survived them, thrived despite them, and built a life that didn't require their validation. Spring in D.C. was ending summer humidity beginning to creep into morning commutes. Soon I'd be in Baltimore building something new, while they lived in the wreckage of something old. The house of cards had fallen, but I was too busy building skyscrapers to notice the rubble. 8 months after I'd vanished, my supervisor, Janet Chen, offered me the promotion that would place me in charge of the new regional office in Baltimore. The deputy director position came with responsibilities I'd dreamed of while filing reports in that cramped accounting office. The authority to build teams, establish protocols, and create systems that protected vulnerable people from fraud. The salary would triple what I'd made in my hometown, and the location meant I could drive past my childhood in 90 minutes if I ever felt nostalgic for disappointment. The decision to accept took less time than my morning coffee. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about the career I'd built from garage floors and grocery store arithmetic. Baltimore offered museums and harbors and row houses with actual foundations, not concrete slabs covered in molding carpet. The office would be mine to shape the team mine to hire the successes mine to own, without disclaimer or diminishment. I spent my final weeks in D.C. training my replacement and preparing for the transition. My studio apartment, once a sanctuary from family chaos, sold quickly to another young federal employee, eager for exposed brick and morning light. The possessions I'd accumulated fit into a modest moving truck. Quality over quantity, each item chosen because I wanted it rather than needed it for survival. The Baltimore office occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower overlooking the inner harbor. My corner office had windows on 2 walls, natural light flooding a space larger than the garage that had been deemed sufficient for my entire existence. I arranged my desk to face the water where boats moved with purpose toward destinations of their choosing. Building my team became an exercise in recognizing potential others might overlook. I hired Sarah, a forensic accountant, who'd worked her way through night school while raising 2 kids alone. Marcus came from the FBI, tired of bureaucracy that prioritized politics over justice. Elena brought expertise in medical billing and a keen eye for patterns developed during her own mother's battle with insurance companies. We created something remarkable in that glass tower. A unit that functioned like family should, supporting each other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses without keeping score. Our conviction rate climbed as we dismantled fraud rings with surgical precision, each case a small victory for people who needed medical care more than criminals needed yacht payments. The twist came when I discovered my former employer had been investigated for embezzlement. The owner of the small accounting firm where I'd worked myself to exhaustion had been stealing from clients while paying employees starvation wages. The investigation revealed decades of systematic theft creative accounting that funded his lake house while I'd rationed ramen noodles. He'd been stealing from clients while paying employees like me minimum wage. The irony was sharp enough to cut. I'd maintained meticulous records to protect clients from theft, while my own employer robbed them blind. Every overtime hour I'd worked for pennies, he'd been siphoning thousands. Every raise I'd been denied due to budget constraints. He'd been financing another vacation property. My meticulous documentation from years of underpaid work had protected me, creating a paper trail that proved my ignorance of his schemes. But the prosecutor needed testimony from former employees, witnesses who could establish patterns of deception. My federal position made me an ideal witness, credible professional and with documented evidence of his business practices. The testimony would be crucial to the case, and my family would surely hear about it. Small cities thrived on scandal, especially when local businesses collapsed in spectacular fashion. My name would appear in newspapers. They read my success, impossible to ignore or claim credit for. The invisible daughter would become visible through federal authority and sworn testimony. I agreed to testify without hesitation. Justice mattered more than their potential discomfort with my success. The depositions happened in the federal building downtown, my former boss looking smaller than I remembered in his orange jumpsuit. He'd stolen enough to pay me fairly for a lifetime-funded luxury through my labor, and now faced consequences while I faced promotion. Local media picked up the story with enthusiasm. Former employee, now federal investigator, testifies in embezzlement case, made headlines that rippled through social media. Comments speculated about my motivations, my knowledge, my trajectory from underpaid clerk to government authority. The truth, that honest work and education could create opportunities even from garages, was too simple for their conspiracy theories. Catherine forwarded screenshots of my mother's Facebook response. We always knew Tara was destined for great things, so proud of our daughter's success. The audacity of claiming pride after relegating me to a garage sparked laughter rather than anger. She was rewriting history for public consumption, creating a narrative where they'd nurtured my ambition instead of exploiting it. But the real opportunity for redemption came from an unexpected source. One Thursday afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door with an unusual expression. "There's someone here to see you. Says she's your sister, but she's not on your approved visitor list." Mackenzie stood in our reception area looking nothing like the pampered princess who'd FaceTimed from sorority houses. Her designer clothes had been replaced by the practical black uniform of food service workers. Her perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a utilitarian ponytail. But the most striking change was in her eyes. They held understanding that privilege had previously prevented. "I won't stay long," she said quickly when I appeared. I needed to see you, to apologize, to maybe understand." I could have sent her away, maintained the distance that protected my peace, but something in her posture, the way she stood without assumption of welcome, made me gesture toward my office. She followed quietly, taking in the space that declared my worth in ways family never had. "This is incredible," she said softly, looking at my degrees framed on the wall, the awards that hadn't become scratch paper, the view that encompassed more than alleys and garbage cans. "You built all this after I left the garage," I finished calmly. "Yes." She flinched at the word, the first indication she truly understood what they'd done. "I've been working at Applebee's," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Doubles on weekends, every holiday, any shift they'll give me. Mom and Dad said it would be temporary just until they figured things out. But it's been 6 months and I'm starting to realize this is what you did for years." The revelation in her voice was genuine. She'd discovered what I'd always known. That work was exhausting, that money was finite, that parents who promised support while taking resources were engaged in elaborate theft. Every double shift taught lessons that university hadn't. Every difficult customer provided education in human nature. "I found documents." She continued pulling a folder from her bag. "Tax returns where they claimed you as a dependent years after you were supporting yourself. Messages between them discussing how to get more money from you. Plans to convert the garage before Brady ever met Sienna." She slid the folder across my desk, evidence of premeditated cruelty documented in their own hands. I glanced through it without surprise. Their exploitation had been systematic, not spontaneous. The garage had been destination, not deviation, in their treatment of me. "Brady was planning to sue you," she added quietly. "He has this lawyer, someone who takes cases for percentage instead of upfront payment. They were going to claim emotional distress, say your abandonment caused his arrest. The absurdity of it, Brady claiming damages from consequences of his own choices, would have been laughable if it weren't so perfectly characteristic. He'd spent a lifetime avoiding accountability, and even federal charges couldn't break the pattern. "What do you want, Mackenzie?" I asked directly. "Why are you here?" She met my eyes with newfound steadiness. "I want to not be them. I want to earn my own way even if it takes longer. I want to maybe have a sister who doesn't hate me for being blind to what was happening in my own house." The vulnerability in her voice was real. This wasn't manipulation masquerading as reconciliation. This was genuine recognition of complicity and desire for change. She'd driven 90 minutes to face potential rejection, offering evidence against our parents as proof of transformation. "I've been accepted to nursing school," she continued. "Community college part-time while I work. It'll take 6 years instead of 4, but I'll graduate without owing anyone anything. I qualified for loans, but I need a co-signer. Not them, you. If you're willing. I understand if you're not." The echo of our parents asking me to sacrifice for family was there, but twisted into something different. She wasn't demanding or expecting. She was asking with full acknowledgement that I had every right to refuse, that my help would be gift rather than obligation. "I have the paperwork," she said, reaching into her bag again. "But more than that, I have these." She pulled out another folder thicker than the first. Recordings of Brady admitting to knowing about Sienna's scheme. Photos of documents that prove they knew exactly what they were doing to you. If you ever need evidence for anything, legal protection, restraining orders, whatever, it's yours. She was offering me ammunition against our family choosing my protection over their comfort. It was the kind of loyalty they'd never shown, the recognition of worth they'd denied. The baby sister was growing up, and growth meant choosing sides in battles that shouldn't exist within families. I took both folders, feeling their weight in more than ounces. "I'll review the loan documents," I said carefully. "If I co-sign, there will be conditions, regular updates on your progress, maintaining a specific GPA, no contact between you and our parents about anything relating to me." "Already done," she said quickly. "I moved out 3 months ago. I rent a room from a co-worker, sleep on an air mattress, and haven't spoken to them since Mom suggested I could make more money in other industries." The implication hung between us. Our mother, faced with financial pressure, had suggested her youngest daughter consider sex work rather than admit their failures. The same woman who'd posted about pride in my success had tried to push Mackenzie toward degradation for dollars. "Send me your transcripts and acceptance letter," I decided. "We'll meet with a financial advisor to structure this properly. This isn't charity. It's investment in someone showing potential for growth." Relief transformed her face, years falling away to reveal the sister I might have known if our parents hadn't created hierarchies of worth. She stood carefully, respecting the boundaries that would need time to soften. "Thank you," she said simply, "for considering it, for not throwing me out, for showing me that there's another way to be." After she left, I sat in my office watching boats navigate the harbor below. The opportunity for redemption wasn't mine to grant or theirs to receive. It was Mackenzie's to create through choices that diverged from their patterns. It was my former employer's to face through legal consequences. It was my parents' to squander through continued delusion. But mostly, it was mine to model through the life I'd built. Every fraud we prosecuted was redemption for victims. Every team member I mentored was redemption for guidance I'd never received. Every success I achieved without their acknowledgement was redemption for years of invisibility. The sun set over Baltimore's harbor, painting the water in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in a suburban house 90 minutes away, my parents were learning that redemption required recognition of what needed redeeming. But I was here, in my corner office building, something better than vindication, a life where redemption meant moving forward rather than looking back, where worth wasn't measured in sacrifices extracted, but in value freely given. Mackenzie's folders sat on my desk, evidence of crimes and possibilities in equal measure. Tomorrow, I'd review loan documents and set conditions for cautious trust. Tonight, I'd go home to my Harborview apartment and cook dinner in a kitchen where no one would demand I move my meal to accommodate their preferences. The opportunity for redemption was everywhere if you knew where to look and whom to offer it to. I drove past my childhood home on a gray Thursday afternoon in November, the sky heavy with rain that hadn't quite decided to fall. 8 months had passed since my disappearing act, and Baltimore had become home in ways that small suburban house never was. But testimony in my former employer's case required my presence at the courthouse, and the route happened to pass the street where I'd learned that family could be more prison than shelter. The lawn was overgrown dandelions conquering grass my father had once maintained with obsessive precision. paint peeled from shutters he'd touched up every spring, and newspapers accumulated on a porch where my mother had once swept twice daily. A for sale sign sat crooked in the yard, the realtor's optimistic price to sell sticker faded from weather and neglect. I didn't stop. The temptation to pause to inventory the decay of their domestic dreams was overruled by the stronger desire to remain a ghost in their narrative. My testimony was scheduled for 2 o'clock, leaving time for the meeting Catherine had been orchestrating with characteristic care. She'd chosen neutral ground, her kitchen table where honest conversations could happen without the weight of history pressing down from familiar walls. Catherine's townhouse welcomed me with the warmth my childhood home had reserved for preferred children. She'd prepared coffee and the kind of pastries I used to make during those 4:30 a.m. bakery shifts, a thoughtful nod to how far I'd traveled from pre-dawn labor to federal authority. We sat in comfortable silence, two women who'd forged friendship from the ashes of family failure. "She's nervous," Catherine said, simply referring to Mackenzie, who was due any moment. "Keeps texting to confirm you'll actually be here. I think she's afraid you'll vanish again." "I only vanish from places where I'm invisible," I replied, watching steam rise from my coffee like promises evaporating. "She sees me now. That's different." The doorbell rang with punctuality I recognized as newly developed. Restaurant work taught precision that university leisure never could. Mackenzie entered carrying a folder and wearing anxiety like an ill-fitting coat, her movements careful as if afraid sudden gestures might shatter this fragile opportunity. She looked older than her 22 years should have allowed. The baby fat that had softened her features through college was gone, replaced by angles carved by double shifts and difficult lessons. Her hands showed the story. Short nails from food safety requirements, small burns from kitchen equipment, the particular dryness that comes from constant hand washing. "Thank you for meeting me," she began formally, then caught herself. Thank you for considering this, for giving me a chance to be different." The shocking moment came when she apologized, not just for taking me for granted, but for actively participating in the family dynamic that had made me invisible. Her voice broke as she detailed memories I thought no one else had noticed, times she'd been given my dessert because she asked, sweetly, Christmas gifts that were supposed to be mine redirected to her wish list, celebrations of her achievements, while mine were dismissed as expected. "I need you to understand something," I interrupted gently. "An apology isn't a reset button. It doesn't erase years of learned behavior or guarantee changed patterns. What matters is what you do next consistently when it's difficult." She nodded, opening her folder to reveal transcripts showing a 3.8 GPA from her final semester before dropping out. "I've been taking prerequisites at community college while working, anatomy, chemistry, statistics, paying as I go with tip money and overtime. It's slow, but it's mine." The pride in earning rather than expecting was new, a fundamental shift from the girl who'd accepted parental largesse without questioning its source. She showed me budget spreadsheets that reminded me of my own desperate calculations, every dollar allocated with purpose, born from scarcity. But the real revelation came with her next confession. "They've been telling people you're on a special assignment, that you're overseas doing classified work, that's why you can't visit. Mom showed someone a photo from your federal ID badge she found online, claiming you send messages through secure channels." The absurdity of their fiction, painting my abandonment as patriotic duty rather than self-preservation, was perfectly characteristic. They'd rather invent a daughter serving her country than admit to driving away the one who'd served them. In their narrative, I was heroically absent rather than deliberately escaped. "Dad drives by Catherine's house sometimes," Mackenzie continued. "Parks down the street for hours hoping to see your car. He's lost weight, aged badly. The house sale is forced. They're months behind on the mortgage without your rent money and my tuition payments." She showed me screenshots of messages between our parents and Brady from over the years discussing how to get more money out of me, how to keep me dependent and available. The garage had been planned long before Sienna arrived, referenced in texts dating back 3 years. Once Em graduates, we can move T to the garage and rent her room for real money. The calculation of it, the premeditation of my exile, should have hurt. Instead, it validated every instinct that had driven me away. They hadn't stumbled into cruelty. They'd strategized it. Planned my marginalization like a business model that required my cooperation to succeed. "Why show me this?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "Because you deserve to know it wasn't your imagination, and because I need you to understand that I see it now. All of it. The way they assigned us value based on what we could provide. Brady was potential, you were provision, I was promise. None of us were just people." The insight was sophisticated for someone who'd been shielded from consequences until recently, but restaurant work was educational in ways sociology courses never could be. Every difficult customer taught patience, every short-tipped shift taught budgeting, every burned hand taught that mistakes had immediate consequences. "I also wanted to warn you," she said, pulling out a final document. "Brady's definitely suing you. He found some ambulance chaser who thinks there's money in claiming your abandonment caused his legal troubles. They're arguing that if you'd been there to manage family finances properly, he never would have been desperate enough to fall for Sienna's scheme." The lawsuit paperwork was real, filed in county court with language that twisted reality into fiction. I was painted as the negligent sister whose sudden desertion of family responsibilities had created a cascade of disasters. The garage wasn't mentioned, my financial contributions were minimized, and Brady was portrayed as a victim of my selfishness rather than his own choices. "My attorney will handle it," I said calmly, having already retained counsel for this possibility. "Discovery will be interesting when they have to provide financial records showing how much I contributed versus how much they took." Mackenzie relaxed slightly, perhaps expecting anger that didn't come. I'd moved beyond fury into something more sustainable, indifference seasoned with preparation. They could file lawsuits and spin narratives, but paperwork didn't change the truth documented in bank records and tax returns. "About the loan." I continued, watching her straighten with hope. "I'll co-sign under specific conditions. You maintain a 3.5 GPA or higher. You provide transcripts each semester. You work no more than 30 hours per week during school terms. Education comes first. And you maintain zero contact with our parents regarding anything about me, my whereabouts, my work, my life." "Already done," she said quickly. "I haven't spoken to them in months. When Mom suggested I try stripping to pay for school faster, I walked out and haven't been back." The casual cruelty of that suggestion, pushing her youngest toward degradation rather than admit their failures, crystallized why I'd run. They weren't just selfish, they were toxic, willing to sacrifice their children's dignity for their comfort. "There's one more thing," Mackenzie said, hesitating. "I've been volunteering at the free clinic downtown. 10 hours a week, no pay, but I'm learning and helping people who remind me of us. People working multiple jobs without insurance, choosing between medication and rent. I want to be a nurse who understands that, who remembers what it's like to count pennies for gas." This was growth, real and difficult and admirable. She was choosing to learn from hardship rather than resent it, to build empathy from experience rather than remain bitter. The golden child was discovering that pyrite couldn't purchase happiness, but honest work could build worth. We spent another hour discussing logistics, which nursing program, what specialization, how to balance work with education. Catherine witnessed our agreement, her presence a bridge between past and potential future. When Mackenzie left, it was with loan paperwork and something more valuable, the beginning of a relationship built on truth rather than hierarchy. I drove to the courthouse for my testimony, passing the crooked "for sale" sign without stopping. In the federal building's marble halls, I swore to tell the truth about embezzlement that had funded luxury while paying poverty wages. My former employer sat diminished in his expensive suit, watching the employee he'd exploited become the authority ensuring his conviction. The testimony was clinical, professional, devastating in its precision. I detailed financial patterns, documented inconsistencies, explained how he'd hidden theft behind family medical emergencies and economic downturns. Each word was vindication for every overtime hour paid at minimum wage while he bought boats. That evening, I returned to Baltimore as rain finally began to fall. My apartment welcomed me with harbor lights reflected in water, the sound of boats finding safe harbor in storms. Mackenzie had texted her thanks, promising to prove worthy of trust. Catherine had sent wine recommendations for celebrating small victories. But I sat quietly on my balcony, watching the city sparkle through rain, thinking about unexpected returns. Not to places. That house with its garage and ghosts held nothing worth revisiting, but to possibilities that sisters could grow beyond parental programming, that testimony could serve justice, that families could be built from choice rather than chromosomes. Somewhere in a suburban house preparing for foreclosure, my parents were learning that children couldn't be inventory managed for profit. Brady was discovering that lawsuits required evidence, not just entitlement. But Mackenzie was studying anatomy while serving appetizers, building a future on foundations of her own labor. The unexpected return wasn't about geography or reconciliation. It was about returning to myself, to the person I'd been before they'd tried to compress me into a garage-sized existence. It was about creating space for growth in others who chose to see beyond their conditioning. Rain drummed on my balcony umbrella, a rhythm like the one I'd heard on the garage's thin roof, but without the accompanying dread. Tomorrow, I'd lead investigations that protected vulnerable people from fraud. Tonight, I'd rest in the knowledge that sometimes the best return was to keep moving forward, carrying only what deserved the journey. Mackenzie had a proposal that arrived through Catherine exactly 1 week after our initial meeting. She'd clearly spent time preparing, creating a presentation that reflected new habits of thoroughness. The coffee shop she'd chosen was equidistant between Baltimore and our hometown, a geographical compromise that acknowledged boundaries while attempting connection. She sat at a corner table with documents spread before her like evidence of transformation. The designer handbag had been replaced by a practical backpack bearing community college logos. Her nails, once professionally manicured weekly, showed the chips and breaks of honest work, but her posture held new confidence, the kind that comes from earning rather than being given. I know asking for more seems wrong after you've already agreed to co-sign loans. She began meeting my eyes directly. But this isn't about money. It's about justice. She'd been accepted to nursing school, qualified for loans, but still needed a co-signer, given her limited credit history. Our parents had refused claiming poverty while somehow funding Brady's legal defense. Their priorities, as always, were transparent in their allocation of resources. The son who'd brought criminals home deserved support, while the daughter, working doubles, deserved suggestions about stripping. I've been organizing documents. She continued, sliding a thumb drive across the table. Everything's digitized, categorized, legally obtained. Tax returns, bank statements, messages, recordings, 3 years of evidence that you might need for protection or legal action. The organization was impressive. Folders by year, subfolders by type of documentation. She'd learned my habits of meticulous record-keeping, applying them to family crimes rather than financial accounts. Tax returns showed claims for dependency credits years after I'd been self-supporting. Bank statements revealed patterns of deposits and withdrawals, timed to my paydays. Messages between our parents discussed strategies for extracting maximum resources while maintaining minimum gratitude. But the shocking revelation was her final offering. Brady was planning to sue me for abandonment and emotional distress that supposedly caused his legal troubles. She had recordings of him discussing strategy with his bargain basement lawyer, laughing about how family court favored abandoned siblings. The plan was to claim my departure had destabilized the family, leading directly to his vulnerability to Sienna's schemes. He's been practicing his victim testimony, Mackenzie said with disgust that matched my own. how you were the stable one who kept everything together, how your desertion left him rudderless. He actually used the word rudderless like he's a ship instead of a 30-year-old man who won't work. She played one recording on her phone volume low in the public space. Brady's voice pitched with false emotion. Tara was like our foundation. When she left without warning, everything crumbled. I was so lost, so desperate for stability that I fell for Sienna's lies. If Tara had been there, none of this would have happened. The narrative revision was breathtaking. In his version, I wasn't the exploited daughter who'd fled abuse, but the cornerstone whose removal had caused collapse. The garage wasn't mentioned. My financial contributions were reframed as stabilizing presence, and his choices became my responsibility. He found a sketchy lawyer willing to take the case for a percentage, Mackenzie explained. They're hoping you'll settle to avoid publicity. They figure a federal employee won't want the attention of a messy family lawsuit. The calculation revealed their fundamental misunderstanding. They thought I'd achieved success despite them, not because of escaping them. They couldn't conceive that publicity might favor the daughter who'd built a career over the son who'd built nothing but debt and delusions. But Mackenzie had recordings of Brady admitting to the fraud, laughing about how they'd all played me for years. His words, captured during what he'd thought were private conversations, contradicted every claim in his lawsuit. He'd known about Sienna's fake pregnancy, had helped plan the insurance fraud, had viewed my garage exile as fortunate timing for their schemes. "There's more," she said, pulling out printed emails. "Mom's been in contact with your old employer, the one charged with embezzlement. She offered to testify that you must have known about his theft, that you were too smart not to notice. She wanted payment for the testimony." The betrayal shouldn't have surprised me, but the depth of it still stung. My own mother willing to commit perjury to damage my career for profit. The emails showed negotiations that had fallen apart when the prosecutor informed her that lying under oath carried federal penalties. She'd retreated, but the attempt was documented. "Why?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "Why would she try to destroy what I've built?" "Because your success without them invalidates their entire worldview," Mackenzie said, with insight that reflected hard-won wisdom. "If you can thrive after they said you were nothing, maybe they were wrong about everything. That's terrifying for people who've built their identity on being right." The truth of it resonated. My federal position, my Baltimore apartment, my life free from their dysfunction. All of it challenged their narrative that I needed them, that family meant accepting exploitation, that sacrifice flowed only upward to preferred children. "I have a proposal," Mackenzie said, straightening her shoulders. "You co-sign my loans and I provide all this evidence for whatever legal protection you need. But more than that, I want to rebuild something real between us, not as the sisters they defined us to be, but as the people we're choosing to become." She outlined her plan with precision that showed growth. Nursing school part-time while maintaining her restaurant job, specializing in community health to serve populations like the one she'd joined, working poor, uninsured, choosing between medication and meals. She wanted to be useful in ways that created value rather than extracted it. "I've also been documenting their current activities," she added, showing photos on her phone. "The house is in pre-foreclosure. They're selling everything valuable, Mom's jewelry, Dad's tools, even family heirlooms. But Brady still doesn't work. He claims PTSD from his arrest makes employment impossible." The images showed estate sale signs, empty rooms where furniture had been sold, the garage returned to its original purpose of storing junk no one wanted. My former bedroom had been stripped bare, even the carpet removed, to reveal subflooring that needed repair. They were dismantling their life piece by piece, while their golden son claimed trauma-prevented contribution. "Your room in the garage is exactly as you left it," she said quietly. "They haven't touched it. Dad goes in sometimes and just stands there. I think he finally understands what they did, but understanding and apologizing are different things." The image of my father standing in that concrete space, perhaps finally seeing it as the exile it had been, rather than the favor they'd pretended carried unexpected poignancy. But recognition without action was just another form of selfishness, feeling bad for their comfort rather than making amends for their crimes. "I'll co-sign your loans," I decided, watching relief transform her face. But understand, this isn't forgiveness or forgetting. It's investment in who you're becoming, not absolution for who you were. The evidence you've gathered gives me options, but more importantly, your gathering, it shows you understand the magnitude of what happened. "I understand," she said firmly. "I was complicit through blindness, comfortable with benefits I didn't earn. Working these past months, struggling to pay for basics, counting tips to buy textbooks, it's taught me what you survived while funding my comfort. I can't undo that, but I can do better." We spent another hour reviewing loan documents, discussing her academic plans, establishing boundaries that would protect the fragile trust we were building. She gave me the thumb drive with all the evidence, keeping copies for her own protection. The student had learned well. Document everything, trust carefully, maintain leverage. As we prepared to leave, she asked one final question. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" "Forgiveness isn't mine to give," I answered after consideration. "They haven't asked for it, haven't acknowledged what needs forgiving. They're still spinning narratives where they're victims of my abandonment rather than architects of their own collapse. Forgiveness requires recognition of harm caused, and they're still too busy cataloging harm received." She nodded, understanding complexity that our parents had never managed. We parted with cautious hope, not for reconciliation with them, but for construction between us. She returned to her restaurant shifts and anatomy textbooks. I drove back to Baltimore with evidence of their crimes and her growth, the thumb drive weighing ounces but containing tons of proof. That evening, I sat in my Harbor View apartment reviewing the documents she'd compiled. The meticulous organization, the careful categorization, the thoroughness of compilation. She'd learned from my example even when I hadn't known I was teaching. The baby sister was becoming someone worth knowing, building character from the wreckage of our childhood. My phone showed a text from her: "First anatomy exam tomorrow. Studying in the break room between shifts. Thank you for believing I could be better." I didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of transformation settle. Outside my windows, Baltimore's lights reflected off water that was always moving, always changing, never the same river twice. Mackenzie was choosing her current swimming against family patterns towards something better. The tables hadn't just turned, they'd been overturned entirely. The invisible daughter had become the stable one. The baby princess had become the working student. The golden son faced consequences, while the forgotten one thrived. Our parents sat in their emptying house selling possessions to fund the failure they'd favored, while the daughter they'd discarded built success from their scraps. But the real reversal was in Mackenzie herself, choosing difficulty over comfort work, over wealth truth, over the lies they'd all agreed to live. She was becoming proof that patterns could be broken, that roles could be refused, that the tables we're given don't have to be the ones we keep. Tomorrow, Brady's lawyer would receive my attorney's response to his frivolous lawsuit, complete with evidence of his admissions and their fraud. Tomorrow, my former employer would face testimony that ensured his conviction. Tomorrow, Mackenzie would take her anatomy exam between serving lunch and dinner to strangers who didn't know she was rebuilding herself one shift at a time. But tonight I sat with evidence of their crimes and her growth, the two folders side by side like past and future in manila envelopes. The tables had turned so completely that up became down, victims became victors, and the garage became a launch pad rather than a landing. The universe, it seemed, appreciated irony as much as justice, serving both with garnishes of growth for those willing to consumption. I co-signed Mackenzie's loans on a Tuesday morning that felt like possibility wearing sensible shoes. My attorney had drafted additional agreements protecting both our interests. academic performance requirements, communication boundaries, and clear consequences for any violation of our carefully constructed trust. She signed everything without hesitation, understanding that accountability was the architecture of our rebuilt relationship. We met at a bank equidistant from our lives, the loan officer treating us with professional courtesy that revealed nothing of our family's implosion. Mackenzie had dressed carefully for the occasion, not the designer casualness of her former life, but the neat professionalism of someone who understood appointments were earned rather than expected. Her signature was steady as she committed to years of education, funded by her own labor and my cautious faith. "I start clinicals next month," she told me afterward, standing in the parking lot between our separate cars. "Sixth floor oncology at Regional Medical. The shift supervisor warned me it's emotionally difficult, but I want to understand caring for people facing real battles, not manufactured drama." The maturity in her choice, selecting difficulty that built character over ease that eroded it, reflected how far she'd traveled from the girl who'd expected life to remain effortless. She was choosing to witness genuine struggle to provide comfort during actual crisis, to be useful in ways our family had never imagined. My parents' house went into foreclosure that same week. Catherine sent me the public notice published in the local paper between advertisements for pizza delivery and estate sales. The description was clinical: single-family home, 4 bedrooms, 2-bath detached garage. No mention of the middle daughter exiled to that garage. The criminals welcomed into bedrooms the family that had collapsed under the weight of its own delusions. They moved into a small apartment across town, the kind with thin walls and shared laundry that they'd once considered beneath them. My mother got a job at a grocery store, the same chain where she'd once complained about prices, while spending my rent money on organic produce for Brady. My father found work at a hardware store, his engineering degree gathering dust, while he advised customers on paint choices and power tools. Brady served 6 months in minimum security and emerged humbled in ways federal prosecution could accomplish, but family enabling never would. The golden boy, who'd never faced consequences, discovered that criminal records followed you longer than parental protection. His music career aspirations dissolved into applications for warehouse positions, each rejection a lesson in how the world worked when mommy couldn't call in favors. The stunning resolution came at my job when my work on the healthcare fraud case earned national recognition. The Department of Justice commended our task force for dismantling a network that had stolen millions from programs designed to help legitimate mothers and children. My name appeared in press releases that reached our hometown paper, the same publication that had covered Brady's arrest and our parents' foreclosure. Federal investigator Tara Morrison leads major healthcare fraud bust, ran above the fold my professional headshot, replacing the high school photo my mother had been showing strangers. The article detailed my role in identifying patterns-building cases and protecting vulnerable populations from predatory schemes. It mentioned my promotion to deputy director, my oversight of multiple state jurisdictions, my trajectory from local accounting firm to federal authority. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew our history. The daughter deemed worthy only of garage space was protecting citizens across 3 states. The child whose achievements went unnoticed was being recognized by the Department of Justice. The sibling expected to subsidize others' dreams had built success that required no one's permission or provision. My consulting firm recruitment came through Janet Chen, who'd followed my career with Mentor's Pride. The signing bonus alone was more than my family had tried to squeeze from me over the years, a number that would have seemed impossible when I was counting pennies for gas money. The position offered flexibility to continue federal consulting while building private practice, creating systems that prevented fraud before it destroyed families like mine. I bought a house with a beautiful garden, multiple bedrooms, and a finished basement that had never housed a struggling musician or his criminal girlfriend. The kitchen had windows overlooking fruit trees. I planted myself roots establishing in soil I owned. My office occupied a sun-drenched room where degrees hung properly framed, awards displayed rather than discarded achievements celebrated in ways my childhood home never managed. No garage. That was deliberate parking designed as an attached structure that was integral to the house rather than afterthought. Every architectural choice reflected lessons learned. No spaces that could become exile, no rooms that suggested hierarchy, no concrete floors disguised as compromise. Every square foot was intentional valuable, and mine. When Catherine visited, she found me converting one room into a library, shelves custom-built to hold books that would never become scratch paper. "You know," she said, watching me arrange volumes by subject rather than sentiment, "disappearing was the best thing you ever did." I smiled, looking around at the life I'd built from determination and distance. "No," I corrected her, understanding, finally settling like morning light through clean windows. Refusing to be invisible was... The distinction mattered. I hadn't just left. I'd chosen visibility on my own terms. Federal investigator instead of family investor. Mentor to Mackenzie instead of enabler to Brady. Professional success instead of personal sacrifice. Every choice had been deliberate, building toward this moment where worth wasn't assigned by birth order, but achieved through effort. Mackenzie thrived in nursing school, sending regular updates that showed consistent excellence. Her messages included photos from clinical rotations, stories of patients who'd touched her heart, and grade reports that exceeded our agreed-upon standards. She was becoming the healer our family had needed, but never nurtured, choosing service that created rather than consumed value. Our relationship developed slowly, built on actions rather than assumptions. She spent Thanksgiving at my house, helping cook in my kitchen, where no one demanded she defer to anyone's preferences. We established new traditions. Gratitude expressed through choices rather than obligations. Appreciation shown through respect rather than rhetoric. She never asked about our parents beyond necessary logistics, understanding that some bridges were better burned than rebuilt. The lawsuit Brady had threatened never materialized beyond initial filings. My attorney's response, complete with evidence of his fraud admissions and their systematic exploitation, convinced even his ambulance-chasing lawyer that pursuing it meant exposing crimes worse than any abandonment claim. The case was quietly withdrawn, Brady's final attempt at extracting value from me, failing like everything else he'd touched. My former employer was convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement, my testimony helping secure a verdict that brought justice to employees and clients he'd robbed. The newspaper coverage mentioned my current position, creating a narrative arc from exploited worker to federal authority that inspired letters from others trapped in similar situations. I answered everyone, offering resources and reminding them that garage floors weren't destinies, but starting points. One evening, as spring arrived with cherry blossoms that didn't require metro rides to admire, I sat in my garden with wine that cost more than weekly groceries once had. The fruit trees were beginning their first real growth branches, reaching toward sky that belonged to no one and everyone. Catherine had joined me, our friendship seasoned by shared understanding of how far we'd both traveled. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed?" she asked, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of possibility. "They'd still be in that house, I'd still be in that garage, and Brady would still be avoiding consequences while spending my rent money." I answered without hesitation. Nothing would have changed except the date on the calendar. She nodded, understanding that some families were meant to be survived rather than sustained. We sat in comfortable silence, two women who'd learned that worth wasn't inherited, but earned, that visibility was chosen rather than granted, that the best families were sometimes the ones you built rather than the ones you were born into. As darkness settled over my garden lights, automatically illuminated paths I designed myself. Every stone was placed with intention, every plant chosen for its contribution to the whole, every element serving purpose without sacrificing beauty. It was everything the garage had never been, thoughtful, valuable, and treated with the respect that space and people deserved. My phone showed a text from Mackenzie. Got an A on my pharmacology exam. Celebrating with ramen because payday isn't until Friday, but it tastes like victory. Thank you for believing I could do this. I smiled, remembering my own ramen celebrations, the peculiar joy of achievements earned through sacrifice. She was learning what I'd always known, that success tasted better when seasoned with your own sweat, that accomplishments meant more when no one smoothed your path. To new beginnings. Catherine said, raising her glass in a toast that meant something different than my father's had all those months ago. To choosing visibility. I countered, and we drank to transformations that began with refusing to accept the spaces others assigned us. The stars emerged overhead, each one visible from my garden in ways they'd never been from the garage's single window. I'd built a life where light reached every corner, where no space was sacrifice, where worth was intrinsic rather than extracted. The garage had been meant to diminish me. Instead, it had become the compression that created diamonds, the pressure that revealed strength, the exile that led to excellence. Looking back, I wouldn't change the journey. Every night in that concrete box had taught me that I deserved better. Every sacrifice had shown me the difference between giving and being taken from. Every moment of invisibility had prepared me to shine when I finally chose to be seen. This is my story of a family who thought a garage was good enough for their daughter, and a daughter who proved that the smallest spaces sometimes produce the biggest transformations. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, overlooked despite your contributions, or sacrificed beyond recognition, know that your worth isn't determined by their blindness. Sometimes the greatest gift toxic people can give you is a reason to leave. What would you do if your family pushed you so far that disappearing became your only option? Have you ever had to choose between enabling dysfunction and saving yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the best families are the ones we find in shared experiences rather than shared DNA. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to hear more stories about resilience, redemption, and the courage to claim your worth. Share this with someone who needs to hear that garage floors can become launching pads, that invisibility can become independence, and that the best revenge is a life well lived without those who couldn't see your value. Thank you for listening to my journey from forgotten to federal investigator, from invisible to invaluable. Remember, you are worth more than the space they give you, stronger than the story they tell about you, and capable of building something beautiful from whatever foundation you're given, even if it's concrete. Until next time, may you always choose visibility on your own terms.